Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
And here we go.
Live from the Hollywood foothills of North Carolina, welcome to episode 91 of the Confirmed Epic Podcast, the official podcast of the epicreview.com. I'm one of your hosts, the real Brad Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is not only my partner, but my friend, Barbecue 17, also known as...
Jerry Reed. What's up, everybody? How's it going?
Jerry, it seems like it's been a while since we've been live on the air. We actually, since we recorded a week ago, how many podcasts have we recorded?
Well, you and I recorded 2 on Friday.
So this would be the 4th in a week if you count last week.
Yeah, the 4th in a week because we recorded last week and so.
Yeah, and the reason we did that was because obviously I'll probably take 2 weeks off when this baby arrives, baby Harper, which is due.
Makes sense.
Yeah, which is due April 25th. And the thing about that is when you get a wife who's about 9 months pregnant, she gets tired easy. She's ready for this thing to just kind of pop out, and it's been so hectic around here. Now, we don't want it to just pop out, right? We want it to happen at the hospital.
Sure.
So that's why on tonight's episode of the pod, we're going to skip the news. There was quite a bit of news, but we're not going to dive deep into the woods with that one. And we're going to do what we've been checking out, like we always open the show up with. And then we'll get into a featured review of Batman and Mr. Freeze SubZero, the 1998 direct-to-DVD. Basically, I guess it would have been VHS at that point, probably 98.
It was
right?
it was a VHS direct to VHS release.
Yeah, so I should say direct to home video instead of direct to DVD. But we'll get into that big release from Warner Brothers because they just released it on Blu-ray for the first time, which is why we're tackling it tonight on episode 92 of the podcast. All right, let's go ahead and get into what we've been checking out this week.
Check checklist? Check. Double checking of checklist? Check.
Jerry Reed, what have you been checking out this week, my friend?
The first thing that I've been checking out this week was Super Sons. I just finished Volume 2 of DC's Rebirth Super Sons comic. Have you read any of this yet?
Yeah, I think I read the first 6 or 7. I think I made it through like issue 8.
Okay, so you've probably read through... Excuse me. You've probably read through some of the storyline in this one. It's called Planet of the Capes. So kind of a pun on Planet of the Apes there, but it's Robin and Damian Wayne teaming up. It's Robin, Damian Wayne teaming up with Jonathan Kent, a.k.a. Superboy.
Who has basically been introduced as Superman's son in DC Rebirth.
Yes, Superman and Lois' son. And this is the son of the Superman and Lois from the post-crisis continuity. Because the New 52 Superman is like a different Superman at this point. So,
Jerry, what I find fascinating about this concept?
What do you find fascinating?
It's that when Superman Returns came out and they kind of introduced this idea that Superman had a kid, people lost their shit. But with this, it's been really well done, but it's been relatively well received by comic book fans. Why do you think that's the case?
I have 2 thoughts on that. My first thought is, again, I think things just feel more natural. People are more accepting in a comic book of things. Strange concepts or new characters just come across better in comic books. And I feel that overall, obviously, comic book writers tend to understand fans a little bit better than folks who are trying to translate source material. Which goes back to my second thing. I didn't mind the idea in Superman Returns of Superman having a child, but I thought, it kind of had a little bit of a silliness to it. You know, you didn't even really get a whole lot of feel for this kid's personality. It was more of like how old was the kid in Superman Returns? I don't remember.
Like, I would say 9 or 10. He was not too much older than.
So Jonathan Kent is supposed to be 10 years old. I think Damien's more like 13 or so is Damien's age.
Yeah. Because
Damien constantly, you know, sort of tells Jonathan he can't be on the Teen Titans because he's not a teen.
Yeah, and Damien's been around a little bit longer. As far as I know, Superboy has been around, but as far as this version of Superboy has been around.
Yeah. One of the best lines in this is, I mean, what's really funny here, you know, Damien is definitely a character. I think, again, when he first shows up, you know, the idea of Bruce Wayne having a son, like a biological child, was definitely a little concerning at first. You know, you kind of think back to the sitcom trope of, you know, when something's dying, a sitcom's dying, they always try to introduce a new kid. But, I mean, Damien has absolutely become one of my favorite Robins. He's my second favorite Robin.
Is Tim Drake your first?
My favorite is Jason Todd.
Wow, that's controversial there.
Yeah, Jason Todd's probably one of my favorite DC characters overall.
You remember when we first started this podcast, Damien had been around a little bit, but they were getting ready to kill him off, Grant Morrison was.
Yes, yeah,
and
absolutely.
People at first hated Damien, and now people, like, as you said, they love Damien. And when they killed him off that time, people were kind of upset about that. We talked about that on the podcast back in the day.
Yeah. He's such a well-written, he's smarmy, he's cocky, and he's hilarious too. I mean, he's highly competent, but the fact that they make him so smarmy and cocky, there's a great line in this, though. One of my favorites. So you see kind of the family dynamic, the difference between, you know, Bruce's parenting style with Damien as part of the Bat family, excuse me, and, you know, Clark and Lois's parenting style. And so, you know, Clark and Lois are really, like, letting Jonathan go out and, you know, fight crime, letting him go out and, you know, wear a costume and get accustomed to this world, because over and over they keep, replaying in Jonathan's mind this idea that, you know, Clark has always told him good people help other people. You know, so again, you see kind of those values that Superman holds dear. But they're having a little bit of a family argument. Lois wants to make sure that, you know, Jonathan has his cell phone and that he'll be home at 10 p.m. And Jonathan tells Lois, and he says, "Oh, come on, it's Friday. Damien's dad lets him stay out all night." And Clark says, "Damien's dad dresses like a bat and gets hit in the head 25 times every night. Maybe not the best argument." So
that's very well written, and it's Peter Tomasi who writes this, right?
Peter Tomasi, who wrote, I know he wrote Batman and Robin, right? The New 52 Batman and Robin series.
Which is crazy because both him and Gleason were the artists when it was Grant Morrison doing Batman and Robin.
Yes, you're right.
So Tomasi's been able to make that transition from artist to writer and still doing some art every once in a while very smoothly, whereas some in comics it's hard for an artist. Like, think of Tony Daniel, great Batman artist, but when he wrote Batman, like with some of the detective stuff early on in the New 52, it was a little rough around the edges. Yeah, definitely some of the weaker, less memorable stuff. Well, I really like this book. I mean, again, the overall storyline is not that crazy. It's okay. That there's a villain in this world who turns out has a heroic counterpart in another world, and Damien and Jonathan gets sent over into this other dimension by accident, and they're trying to have these people who basically are trying to survive on a living planet. So it's pretty fun storyline. But what I really like is it very much is a humor book that works. I mean, it reminds me of some of the old
the old team up stories. Robin and Jimmy Olsen teamed up for a while, years ago, probably the mid 60s to late 60s. Robin and Jimmy Olsen teamed up, and you used to have all these kind of crazy team up books and stuff that some of them were often humor books. The humor works so well with these two. Seeing the children of Clark and Bruce interacting with each other is just a really funny way to almost re-examine. They're their own characters, but it's also a funny way to sort of re-examine the relationship between, Bruce and Clark. One of the greatest things in this book is finally at the end, Bruce and Clark decide, these boys, they're going to be crime fighters, they're going to be heroes. There's no other way about it. That they're going to have their own headquarters. Yeah. And Jonathan decides he wants to call it the Fortress of Attitude. And Damien is like, we are not calling it the Fortress of Attitude.
That sounds badass.
It really does. I really like this book. This is one of the only, I guess at this point I read 3 Superman titles, you could argue, because I'm reading Justice League, I'm reading Supergirl, and I'm reading Super Sons.
I'll tell you that the Tomasi and Gleason Superman run has been really strong throughout. I've basically read, I'm like one issue behind on that in singles, so it's one of my favorite books every month. I'm glad to see Bendis come to DC, and I think he'll do well with Superman, but it's kind of sad to see Tomasi leave Superman at the same time.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, Jerry, when you were like how Clark and Lois and Clark, I should say, it sounds better. How Lois and
Clark. We're accustomed to that.
Yeah, how Lois and Clark instilled in Jonathan Kent. Jerry, is clear that this version we get of Superman was not raised by the Kevin Costner Jonathan Kent, because this version of Superman...
Yeah, this is a very traditional Clark Kent.
Yeah, because this version of Superman's instilling Jonathan go out and help people when Kevin Costner says, when Superman asks him in Man of Steel, should I do nothing? And Kevin Costner replies, maybe. So that's Super Sons, written by Peter Tomasi. I think art's by Jorge Jimenez. So check that book out. Jerry, I've been checking something out on a completely different spectrum. I talked about Jackass last week. So
you mentioned that.
We continued our Jackass marathon. We only had one thing left to see, and it was the one thing I haven't seen in the Jackass franchise as far as feature films, and it's Jackass Presents Bad Grandpa. Now, what's fascinating about this film, Jerry, did you know it was filmed in parts of Shelby and in Charlotte?
I did know that. I feel like I had met somebody one time I was talking to who their family kind of does like the beauty pageants, like the kid beauty pageants and stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
And that they this friend of theirs was actually at one of the pageants where part of this movie took place, and they didn't know it until it started happening. So
that's kind of like the movie's culminating scene. Well, do you know what restaurants featured in this movie prominently in Charlotte?
The Penguin, correct?
That's right, which the Penguin was like a Charlotte landmark for years. It's a very
popular...
Doesn't
he like run over the giant penguin or something? Or
yeah, he does. Jerry,
I feel like I remember that from the trailer.
Yeah, it was in the trailer. Jerry, you and I have ate at the Penguin before. Remember that?
It's been a while, hasn't it?
It's been a while. Well, they've shut it down now because they got
Yeah. It was after HeroCon one year.
Mm-hmm. HeroCon
was Andrew was there with us and Philip.
Yeah, God, Philip, one of Andrew Stokes' good friends, was there.
Yeah.
Abby and I used to eat there all the time when we were going to UNC Charlotte, but they got under new ownership about right after we ate there at HeroesCon, and the new owner pretty much ran the place into the ground, and this diner that had been there like 48, 50 years ended up shutting down. So that was a very tragic story to a local business. But anyway, this Bad Grandpa is one of the most famous scenes from Jackass. We talked about that kind of last week on the podcast. But what they did here is they edited the stuff like the people didn't know, like the spoofs you're talking about with the video pageant. The beauty pageant, and when they edited it into like a linear narrative. And I don't know if I've ever laughed harder in a movie in my life. I couldn't imagine seeing this in the theater. Jerry, very seldom do I laugh so much it hurts, or laugh so much I have tears running down my eyes, or my cheek, I should say, out of my eyes. But oh my God, Jerry, there's just scenes in this movie that are just crazy. There's a scene, he goes into a bingo hall, and I'm not going to spoil every gag here. This is just one that sticks out, Jerry.
Okay.
And he starts, like, all these senior citizens in there. He fits right in. He brings in a blender, and he starts making margaritas, Jerry, in the middle of this bingo hall. And then there's, like, these stamp things in the bingo hall, and he runs out of his margarita, and he ends up drinking that stuff, like the liquid that's in the stamp thing. And he goes, "Woo, that shit done gone bad." And I'm telling you, there's just parts of this movie that are insane, outrageous. He goes to a blackmail strip club, which is just insane. They're out at a diner at one point, and they rigged up something in his behind where he basically sharded all over the wall. And everybody, I mean, it's lowbrow humor, let's be honest.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It really is juvenile as you can get when it comes to humor. I'm not saying it's like overtly clever here, but oh my God, I don't know what it says about me, but Abby died too. We were just rolling, man. So if you want you don't mind lowbrow humor, raunchy stuff, and you just want to have a epic laugh. If we're talking about rating this movie just based on how hard you laugh, it's confirmed epic. Now, am I comparing it to the great comedies of all time? Absolutely not. It's not Anchorman. It's not Dumb and Dumber. It's not, the Liar Liar or something like that. But it is just laugh out loud funny. So that's one thing I've been checking out. Jerry, have you been checking out anything else?
Yeah, I've been checking out one other thing. I wanted to mention real quick, because I know you've received a little bit of heckling about this.
eBay?
I watched Paddington. I watched Paddington over the last weekend.
Yes, what'd you think?
Paddington was a very fine film. I enjoyed it immensely. So, it was great. I'm really looking forward. There's a second one coming out, right?
Yeah, it should be out on DVD by the end of April.
Oh, so it's already come out.
Yeah, it came out in the UK in December, November, and then it came out in the States January, February, and it's getting ready to hit home video here shortly. Okay.
Well, when I was growing up, I had I can't remember if I owned it. I think I would borrow it from our library. But it was like a Paddington tape, like a guy, this older British man reading the Paddington stories. And he just had the most pleasant, calm voice. And I just remember always, at night, I would sometimes fall asleep listening to these Paddington tapes. But it was just a really fun movie. We watched it. My parents were in town. And one afternoon, we sat down. And my little daughter, she's really funny about movies sometimes. That, she won't want to watch a new movie. She didn't want to watch Paddington at first, and so we just kind of put it on, and after a few minutes, suddenly she's kind of enthralled.
Kind of takes after her mother in that regard, being weird about movies, because Kristen's kind of that way too, especially horror movies.
Yeah. But she was super into Paddington once it finally hit. She hasn't asked to watch it again, but it's only been a few days, so we'll see if it pops up. But I really enjoyed it. But anyways, the thing I wanted to mention real quick that I've been checking out, and maybe I'll talk about it a little bit more since I know it took up some of our time talking about Paddington. I just bought Far Cry 5.
No problem about Paddington. He's always welcome on this podcast, Jerry.
We could do a Paddington podcast. Yeah. I would be all about that. So,
yeah. All right.
Did you notice? Do you remember who the mother is in Paddington?
She is the girl from Shape of Water, Eliza, right?
Yes. Yes, indeed. Sally Hawkins, am I right? Sally Hawkins?
Sally Hawkins, that's exactly right.
Yes, is the mom in Paddington. And,
it's kind of weird to see
out.
her as the mom in Paddington and then to watch Shape of Water and she's making love with a fish man.
Hey, but guess what? There's a scene in Paddington where Paddington floods a bathroom completely. We're like, what is with this lady in movies where bathrooms get flooded? You know, that's an oddly specific thing to happen. So
that's probably how Del Toro cast her for Shape of Water.
He's sitting there chilling out, watching Paddington, like, this is it. This is her. So Peter Capaldi was in it. That was pretty cool, you know. So Peter Capaldi showed up, and
it was well
a couple
casted.
other kind of character actors and folks. I mean, he's not a character actor, but a couple other character actors I recognize too. So I enjoyed it. No, but I picked up Far Cry 5 last week. So,
and you don't play many video games these days.
I do not play. I think last year, I can honestly tell you, I think I purchased and played about 6 video games all of last year. Resident Evil 7, Super Mario Odyssey, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Golf Story, and something else. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Only games I played last year.
Was Resident Evil 7 good, Jerry?
It was very good. It's very different. No, Resident Evil 7 was good, but I'm playing Far Cry 5, and I actually have played the last, probably since 3. I've played most of the Far Cry games. I didn't really care for 2, but I played 3. Andrew had lent me 3, and, you know, kind of the general story with the Far Cry games, I mean, they're all their own thing. You know, they all are their own story or whatever. But usually you're somebody that's thrust into sort of a different environment. You know, there's one that's like takes place in Africa. There's some that take place in, you know, like usually like some remote region or country where there's a lot of, you know, turmoil going on. This is the first one that takes place in the U.S. You're actually a deputy working with a U.S. Marshal in this remote county in Montana called Hope County, where this like doomsday cult has just taken over an entire county, and
like
so
the
like they
Branch
own all the,
Davidians.
you know, what is it?
Kind of like the Branch Davidians in Waco.
I mean, there's mixtures of things like, you know, the Branch Davidians and, you know, a lot of like doomsday prepper kind of things going on, and Christian fundamentalism, but mixed with, you know, various like, the Jim Jones cult. I'm trying to remember the name.
Yes, the Kool-Aid. That's the Kool-Aid.
Yeah,
right
which was actually Flavor Aid. It was not Kool-Aid. It was generic. So the People's Church. I can't remember the name of the People's Temple was the name of the church that they were involved with. But it's really interesting. I'm liking it so far. I mean, it's a fun game, fascinating. I'll probably talk about it more as I go. But it's been interesting to see the responses to it. There's definitely been people who have been offended by this game because it's a vaguely, you know, Christian cult. I mean, I would say the only thing that seems any bit Christian about it is that the cult kind of uses like gospel-sounding music, and obviously they talk about God, although, you know, that can be a very generic thing to talk about.
Yes.
But, you know, they talk about sin and stuff. I mean, honestly, it comes off more as like something you would think of in the movie Red State. Have you seen Red State? Kevin Smith.
Jerry, I was literally about to ask you if you've seen Red State, because this is exactly what it sounded like. Yeah, I've seen Red State. Good movie.
Yeah. There's things about it that reminded me of that, but, you know, there's also elements of it that are, again, very vague that, you know, that make me think about like, I mean, some of Bray Wyatt's speeches, you know, and stuff, like kind of this over-the-top nature as well. I mean, the Far Cry games are not Grand Theft Auto. They're not, you know, like, overly silly and humorous, but there's always a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing going on as well. But, again, a lot of the allies that you have are, again, sort of these, country folks and, preppers. And, there's like a minister who, is a minister of like a regular church that's joined this fight as well. So it's interesting. It's interesting playing a game that has always been set in, a country other than the U.S., like kind of these far off places, you might think of as a gamer in the States. And then finally, here's one that takes place in a remote region of Montana, which we're kind of I'm in a rural county. My county's on the cusp of not being rural, but we're technically considered a rural county. So there are definitely some things that I absolutely see around here, but I'm sure for folks who live in, the big city, there are parts of this that seem definitely more foreign and more, alien to them than they are to me. But I'm definitely enjoying it so far.
That sounds interesting. It actually tempts me
Plug my
to
Xbox One again. I hadn't used my Xbox One probably, my gosh, I couldn't tell you when, except for, using it for wrestling events. So, which WrestleMania was this weekend, last Sunday, but I will not get into WrestleMania, Brad.
All right, thank you, Jerry. How long did it take to update your Xbox since you hadn't plugged it in?
Well, I update it every month or 2 months, twice a month when, because we use it to watch the WWE Network.
Okay, so you kind of
streams. It streams better through Xbox One than anything else, so I do get a chance to update it.
Okay, Jerry. One other thing I've been checking out really quick here, kind of a
tell me.
A good segue from a video game. Westworld. I'm 7 episodes in. Abby and I have been watching it. Westworld is probably the second most popular show on HBO right now that's on, behind Game of Thrones. It's getting ready to come back for season 2. Season 1 aired in fall 2016. So I'm trying to catch up in order to watch season 2. I don't know if I've ever seen a show raise as many mysteries as this since Lost. But,
okay, I was going to say, since Lost?
Yeah, since Lost. And then I would say only 7 episodes in, this has already paid off more than Lost paid off in 6 seasons. And I like Lost, and I like Lost ending. I didn't have a problem with it. I'm not going to spoil that here, because I know a lot of people are going to infinitely watch Lost. But it is so worth checking out. The idea behind Westworld, based on an old Michael Crichton movie, of course, is very similar to Jurassic Park. And I mentioned this on a future podcast that's been pre-recorded for Baby Days. And so I'm not going to get too much into what Westworld is. Basically, the rich pay $40,000 a night to go into a simulated world where they can go and interact with what's called hosts, which are very lifelike robots, all right? So, but here's what I want to mention. If you watch Westworld, I highly recommend checking out the Decoding Westworld podcast. It's hosted by David Chin and Joanna Robinson. They host one of the most famous Game of Thrones podcasts on the internet called Cast of Kings. And I have purposely not binged through this like straight through. I've pretty much been watching like 1 episode a day in the evenings with Abby. We just watched episode 7 before this podcast. That way I can watch an episode and listen to one of their episodes. It's like an hour long. And that podcast is so fun because it was week to week, right? And they were theorizing on the possibilities. And I'm glad I got a chance, even though the show has already aired season 1, that number 1, I hadn't been spoiled, and number 2, I've kind of, in a way, taken my time with it, because that's a big part of this show is the theories and how they pay off. And do you know who actually writes Westworld and actually came up with the idea of translating the movie to a show, Jerry?
I do not.
It's Jonathan Nolan, Chris Nolan's little brother, who helped write the script for The Dark Knight.
Really?
Yeah, he's the showrunner and like head writer for the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does it in any way like is the original movie? I don't know much about the new series. I mean, I've heard good things about it. I mean, is it a sequel to the movie, or is it just kind of a reimagining? Like,
it's definitely a complete retelling of the movie.
Okay.
I've never seen the movie. I've actually heard good things about when the movie came out, early 70s, I think like 73 or something.
73, and then there's actually there was a sequel, like Future World or something, and then I think there was another TV series at some point too, but I mean, this is like the 80s. So
it's crazy because Westworld, unlike Jurassic Park, Westworld was never a book. Like Michael Crichton directed this movie, Jerry.
Michael Crichton wrote a lot of scripts. Yeah, and you said he directed it too?
I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me check out and see who. Maybe he just wrote it. But
I don't know. You very well may be right. Michael Crichton, I mean, he wrote a lot of scripts and stuff too. I mean, I think he wrote books, but I think Jurassic Park was like, I mean, it was actually sold, I think, as a screenplay essentially before he even wrote the book. Like, he almost wrote the book so that it could be adapted.
He wrote the movie and directed the movie Westworld.
Okay.
So I highly recommend this show. It's hard to believe.
I know he was really involved with what was the big hospital show? ER.
Oh, ER. Okay.
ER. Yeah, I mean he was involved in that as well. So he was. I always think of him as a writer too, but he was super involved in all kinds of different entertainment mediums.
It's hard to believe what Michael Crichton died in 2008. And he's been dead 10 years. It's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Then that last book got published. I can't remember what it was, like at the end of 2017. It's actually supposed to be really good. It's almost sounds like Westworld meets Jurassic Park because it's about these false people who are basically paleontologists, but in the time of, late 1800s in the West.
Dragon Teeth?
Yeah, that's it. Have you read that?
Okay.
I know you're a Crichton fan.
I have not. I haven't read that many of his books. I read Jurassic Park every few years, and my gosh, that book still is just such a page turner. It's such a good book,
and different from the movie too.
Oh, extremely different, but it's cool rereading it because you can see how they got so many ideas for future scenes from the movies from the original book. Other one, I read Timeline a couple years ago. That's probably his most recent one that I've read. Somebody lent me Timeline.
Dragon Teeth sounds like, some of his writing can be dense at times.
Dragon Teeth sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
Yeah, it does, and
that's what you're gonna say.
Reading the description, it did sound like it could get dense with some of the paleontology stuff, but he's not Tom Clancy or anything here. He's not going in the detail of every tool being used by the paleontologist like Tom Clancy would do with a weapon or something.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, Dragon Teeth is something like, it's on my Amazon wish list, Jerry. So, but there are a lot of...
Are you going to make that public so people can buy you things and send them to you?
Yeah, I think I will. I'll tweet that out, and any listeners that want to do that, they can. All right, Jerry, that's going to do it for what we've been checking out this week. So let's go ahead and get into our featured review of Batman and Mr. Freeze, SubZero.
You wanted more, and it's here. Batman and Mr. Freeze, SubZero. Deep within the frozen Arctic,
Nora!
The love of Victor Freeze was shattered.
There aren't any deceased donors that match.
Then we'll have to use a live donor.
Hi, Dad. Sorry I'm late.
Hang on! An all-new feature-length adventure. Batman animation beyond anything you've seen before.
Let me go!
I want my daughter found.
Don't worry, sir. We're on it.
Brace yourself. If I'm not back in time, go without me.
What? Wait!
Look out!
SubZero. From Warner Brothers Family Entertainment. Own it. Only on video.
just like we love to do here on the Confirmed Epic podcast for all of our movie reviews, let's go ahead and get into a few stats for SubZero. Nerd! SubZero. Batman and Mr. Freeze SubZero was released March 17th, 1998. It was actually delayed a year. It was supposed to come out in the summer of 97, but after the terrible reviews for Batman and Robin, they wanted to distinctly separate it, so they ended up pushing it back a year.
What is Batman and Robin?
Yeah, to be covered on a future Confirmed Crap podcast.
I've never heard of that movie.
It's directed by Boyd
I'm blocking
Kirkland.
it out. I've blocked it out.
It's scored by... You froze it out?
I froze it out of my mind. I've never heard of Batman and Robin.
It's scored by Michael McQuestion. It is Warner Brothers, of course, being DC. It's going to be Warner Brothers. You have Kevin Conroy as Batman. It's in that Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Batman the Animated Series style. 67-minute running time, very well received, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. Which I was kind of surprised by, to be honest. Jerry, you watched this movie last night.
I did. I have actually never seen this before.
Which amazed me. I figured you owned it already. And
yeah.
Why is that the case?
This probably came out at a time... In 1998 was probably the time when I was... probably the least interested in Batman. This is probably the time I was the least interested in comic books in general. Probably middle school, late middle school. This was my massive Star Wars video games. Not that those Star Wars things ever went away, but I was definitely paying attention to Star Wars and video games. And I was not paying that much attention to Batman during this period. So, it probably came out, and again, it was direct to VHS, and I was a little bit older. So, it wasn't something that, I would have went and saw in the theater, like I did with Mask of the Phantasm.
Yeah.
VHS movies were expensive.
Yeah, they were like $30 sometimes.
Yeah, stuff was kind of pricey and stuff, and I don't know. It wasn't the kind of movie that I guess I would have rented. I vaguely remember it coming out, but I didn't watch it. So
you talk about the price of VHS. I remember the first 5 episodes of Power Rangers were released on VHS.
Oh my gosh, and those were expensive too.
Yeah, and
for a TV show,
every single episode of the Green Ranger miniseries was not on the same VHS. They milked this. It was $25 to $30 for a 22-minute episode.
Yeah.
But I had them all, which is crazy because if you go on Amazon, you can own Power Rangers season 1 through 3 for $25-$30.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's insane. It's insane. All right, Jerry, do you want to set this movie up for us? Kind of just a general overview of what it's about?
Absolutely. So this movie does, it is in the continuity of Batman the Animated Series, which I think at this point was just about to become the new Batman Adventures, if I remember correctly. Which really was the same continuity as well, just kind of a little bit of a stylistic difference and show identity change. Mr. Freeze has gone to the Arctic. He has 2 polar bears with him. He has an Inuit son, who is named, I think, Kunik.
Is it Kuna or Akuna?
I think it's Kunik, or Kunik or Kunak. But he has 2 polar bears with him, and the military has been sending, subs to try to find, or is sending a submarine to try to find a missing submarine, and it turns out that Mr. Freeze has frozen the crew of the submarine that he is keeping his wife Nora. He's keeping her frozen in the Arctic, to make her well. But when a submarine surfaces, it damages the cryogenic pod that she's in. If we go back and remember, Nora Freeze was Mr. Freeze's wife, and she had a terminal illness.
Okay, so Jerry, the name of the terminal illness in Batman and Robin is McGregor's syndrome.
McGregor's syndrome.
Yeah, the doctor in this is Dr. Gregor, right?
Dr. Gregory Belson.
Gregory, okay.
Yeah.
You think it's any coincidence? Did they pull maybe from one or the other? I know it's not Dr. McGregor, but I just wonder, Jerry. These are the kind of things that keep me up at night.
Considering they pulled this movie back a year so that it didn't have anything to do with Batman and Robin. Wait, I thought I said I forgot about that movie.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm having repressed memories coming forward. No, I do not like the film Batman and Robin at all. So we'll get that out of the way. Okay, so they did pull this movie. They held it back a year, almost a year, so that the stink of the Schumacher film was that the stench had kind of subsided, only to find out that the stench never goes away from that movie.
It took Christopher Nolan to bring Batman back. That's how bad it was.
It did. So I don't know. I feel like it's probably coincidence, to be honest. That's my thought.
There are some things, like the vehicle Freeze drives is very similar to the vehicle Arnold drives in Batman and Robin.
There probably are some things that are a little bit similar. Again, you have Mr. Freeze, you have Batman, Robin, and Batgirl in this film.
Mm-hmm.
But that was pretty common cast with the Batman animated series too. But anyway, so when the submarine comes up, it smashes Nora Freeze's cryogenic pod, and so Mr. Freeze has to take her back to Gotham to find a Dr. Belson who he had worked with previously, who was an expert in like rare diseases or something. And they find out that Nora Freeze has to have an organ transplant. But her blood type's fairly rare. And going through the hospital system of blood donors, they find that Barbara Gordon, a.k.a. Batgirl, actually has the same blood type as Nora Freeze. Their weights are similar. I think their ages are, fairly similar. She's younger. And so they decide that Mr. Freeze wants to kidnap Barbara Gordon and, again, use her organs to save his wife.
Yeah,
and so Barbara gets kidnapped and things ensue.
Yeah, they do. Do you consider this a sequel to Mask of the Phantasm?
I don't really think it's a sequel to Mask of the Phantasm. Again, Mask of the Phantasm is kind of part of the ongoing Batman the Animated Series, and this is really another film in that TV series. So I think it's a part of the Batman the Animated Series, not necessarily in any way a sequel to Mask of the Phantasm.
Mask of the Phantasm was such higher stakes. Like, yes, it felt like Batman the Animated Series, but it felt like it's such more on a grandiose level. And a lot of that had to do because it got the theatrical release. This feels like a 2-part episode, maybe even a 3-part episode that was put together to create a movie that would match up with the release of Batman and Robin, which tanked, and they end up pushing this. It's definitely what this feels like. But I think one thing go ahead, Jerry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's kind of how I felt watching it too. I really did enjoy this quite a bit, but it definitely does feel that there's no reason this could not have been 2 or 3 episodes of the series, like a 2-parter or a 3-parter.
And I think anytime you talk about Batman the Animated Series and Mr. Freeze, you always have to deal with the elephant in the room of Heart of Ice, which is kind of the introduction of Mr. Freeze in the Batman the Animated Series continuity, which actually won an Emmy for screenwriting.
And really not just a... really not just a introduction of Mr. Freeze into the animated series canon, but really a radical retooling of the Victor Freeze, Mr. Freeze character.
Yeah, all the stuff with Nora being cryogenically frozen and stuff, that was introduced here, and not in this movie, but in Heart of Ice, as we're referencing, and that ended up being the status quo for Mr. Freeze for, basically across all different types of Batman continuity.
I think it would be so fascinating to really go back and look at where various... It would be fascinating to go back and look at various things in film and animation for Batman and see where, what came from those different media sources that have entered into comics. I mean, there's so many things from Batman animated series that, take the character of Harley Quinn, the introduction of Mr. Freeze in this way. There's so many things that have had a radical impact on, you might say, the Batman canon over the years. And you're right, whenever you start talking about Mr. Freeze, I think whenever you talk about Mr. Freeze in any context, Heart of Ice is always going to come up. It's such a definitive origin story for the character. Personally, I like this as kind of a follow-up. I know Mr. Freeze has appeared in, other things in Batman the Animated Series as well, but this was an interesting bit of character development for the character.
You think of like Harvey Bullock, Renee Montoya.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Staples in Batman comics after they were big parts of Batman the Animated Series, and of course you have Bullock on Gotham now. It really set kind of the bar, the status for what Batman storytelling was and how characters and what characters would be used. All right, so you said you liked this movie. That's kind of your initial impression of it, right?
Yeah.
I'll say this. I didn't really enjoy this movie. I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it by no stretch of the imagination, but I remember the last time I watched this movie was before The Dark Knight come out, so that was 10 years ago. My friend Paul and I literally watched every Batman. Like, we went through the whole animated series, the 66 movie. Everything but the 66 episodes, which weren't out on DVD as of 2008.
Right.
Yeah, we went and we watched through it that summer. Dark Knight come out, because Dark Knight come out like in July. I think it was July 18th, if I remember correctly. And that's the last time I had seen this, and it wasn't as good as I remembered it for sure. But you mentioned like some of the sit-up. I love the sit-up with like you were talking about what's his name, Jerry, the little Eskimo kid,
Kunik.
Yeah, Kunik and the polar bears, and like it really.
You know who voices the polar bears?
Who?
Frank Welker.
Who is?
He is the actor who has appeared in the most. If you look at gross for films, I think he is the highest grossing actor for films because he voiced Megatron.
Yes, that's what I thought.
He's voiced so many. Scooby-Doo for years. Pretty much any movie where there's vocal effects or voice effects, you're going to find that Frank Welker's involved.
Yeah. He's been brought up before on this podcast. So I do like that they show Freeze as being empathetic, because I think deep down Victor Freeze is a good person. He's just cold toward the world because of his situation that he was dealt, having Nora taken away from him. This makes him a great and complex character.
I anticipated a question from you, and you haven't asked it yet, which I was curious if you were going to ask me where Mr. Freeze ranks on my list of favorite Batman villains.
All right, Jerry, where does Mr. Freeze rank on the list?
My answer to that was going to be, I don't know. I don't really have a list of my favorite Batman villains. It's really tough. And, going back and forth, Mr. Freeze is definitely on the upper part of the list. But I was going to say, one of the things that's hard about that is Batman villains, and I think it's because they appear so frequently and folks are always wanting to do, something new with them. There are so many Batman villains who over the years have become, tragic characters, or who have become, heroes or anti-heroes, or, sort of not really hero, not really villain. You have characters like the Riddler, who the Riddler becomes like a private detective for a while, so he's not quite a villain at times. Batman characters have so many stories about them that it's often hard to say how many true villains Batman has, because they have storylines like this where there's a lot of really villainous stuff going on, but we see a lot behind the curtain as well, of what has happened to Freeze and how he relates to the world. I really like the beginning of this film because you're actually seeing Freeze not in his armor, which he relies on to survive. He's just swimming in the Arctic.
So he doesn't need the armor because it's so cold.
He's naked, a pair of trunks and stuff, just swimming in the Arctic. He even gets out and he just kind of knocks the ice off of him, just kind of showing how cold things are. So I thought that was a really neat way to introduce the character. I could see that as being... I always have felt that regardless of if it was a TV episode or a film like Mask of the Phantasm, Batman the Animated Series was wonderfully theatric. You could see so many of these scenes and set pieces in this show. You could see them being turned into a live action film. They really almost animated this movie and the camera work and everything to make it feel, like a big budget film. And it's just such a cool introduction to the character.
So riddle me this, Barbecue 17.
All right.
Who is your favorite Batman villain? If you had to pick one.
I mean, I feel like if you don't say the Joker, you're probably lying.
So let's take the Joker off the table. Okay.
Let's take the Joker off the table. See, that you start getting into is Harley Quinn a villain? I am very fascinated by Two-Face.
Yeah.
Two-Face definitely, when he is used right, he is one of the most fascinating villains to me because he is so conflicted.
It's hard for me to pick between Two-Face and the Riddler, but those would be my two. And it's not because of Batman Forever, believe me. But
yeah, absolutely.
Those two are probably my favorite aside from Joker.
Me neither. But Mr. Freeze ranks high up there. And I'm always fascinated how he's a character who has been reinterpreted a couple times over the years.
Yeah. Jerry, just some things I kind of didn't like about this movie without getting too spoilerific here, and we will do a short spoiler section.
Are we going to spoil a film from 1998, Brad?
I mean,
just kidding.
I mean, you never know, Jerry.
I hadn't seen it. You're right. So.
Yeah. I like with the Avengers, come on, everybody's seen it. But with this, maybe people hear this podcast and they're like, I'll check that out now. So I want to give them a heads
because
up.
You're right, it did just come out on Blu-ray, so some folks are going to have more access to it. Yeah. I watched it on DVD. I actually bought a DVD copy that had Mask of the Phantasm with it. Yeah. I didn't know that when I bought it, but I already had Mask of the Phantasm, so now I have two copies.
Was it like one of the ones where it was on the other side of the
disc? Mask is on one side and SubZero's on the other.
I think I had that copy too. Classic. So here's some things I didn't like about it. It seemed like a lot of this film, I would say, it's 67 minutes, but I'd say with credits, it's probably 60 minutes strong. It's
not very long at all.
Yeah, it's very short. I would say that so much of this film, almost like a quarter of it, felt like it was Barbara Gordon, who I love, not as much as you, but I do like Barbara Gordon. But it seemed like it was her struggling on this oil rig, just trying to break free. And that, she had some very clever ways to try to escape. Yeah. She was resourceful, but it just got a little monotonous at some point. And she was kind of the damsel in distress, which I never think of Barbara Gordon as being that. Is she's always able to solve the problem herself. But Batman and Robin really have to come rescue her, or at least get her off the rig. She's already kind of started to rescue herself. So to say they rescued her is not fair for me to say. But that's just kind of some things I didn't like about the film.
So I kind of thought that too. This is almost as much a Barbara Gordon movie as it is a Mr. Freeze movie. And while Batman is certainly involved in solving this mystery or figuring out what Freeze is up to, it honestly does feel that Barbara Gordon and Mr. Freeze probably have the most screen time. And so I really would have liked to have seen the movie sort of refocused a little bit to focus more on, again, that this is Barbara trying to escape, and kind of having this battle with Mr. Freeze and the Doctor, that they are Dr. Belson.
Yeah.
That, because the story is Mr. Freeze wants to exchange her life for his wife's. He wants to use her in a non-consensual organ transplant for his wife. You're right, though. There are lots of times in this movie where you obviously see Barbara Gordon as on top of things and handling everything, and then there are times when she definitely sort of falls into that damsel in distress character, which again seems very out of character for her, especially. Now, Mr. Freeze, he's portrayed as being really strong. He's typically portrayed as being like extremely strong.
Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays him. Duh.
Right. Well armed. So it makes sense that any any hero would still have a hard time fighting him. But there was a point where Barbara Gordon is running away from Dr. Belson. And why is Barbara Gordon running away from him? Why doesn't she just kick him in the face? Because they even show early in the film, Batgirl dispatches like 7 or 8 guys like right in a row in this little cutaway scene.
If Joel Schumacher was directing this, Batgirl would kick him in the nuts and there would be a ding sound effect.
Ding! The only thing I could think of was that Barbara Gordon didn't want to reveal her true identity, so she was kind of holding back a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Jerry, you made a good point about spoilers. I'm not going to do a spoiler reel. I'm going to freeze that, if you will, because the only thing I had in spoilers was that Babs and Nora are the same blood type, and you've already said that.
I think that's kind of set up part of the plot.
Yeah, so no spoiler section tonight. I do want to make note, one thing I like, the Batwing in this film, how it looks, how it's used. I enjoy the Batman the Animated Series Batwing. It's used in both this and Mask of the Phantasm very well.
Yeah.
Really in Mask of the Phantasm a lot better. But you didn't always
the animation in that scene is really good too. As when the Batwing is flying out of the Batcave,
especially
the animation
for
is really cool.
97, 98.
Yeah.
It's really good. And the thing is, you didn't see the Batwing. You saw it in the show, but it was like a special thing. It was every couple of shows.
Yeah.
The Batwing. It didn't show up like the Batmobile or even like the Batcycle did. They're going to re-release the animated series in Blu-ray here by the end of the year. Is that something? I know you own every episode. You have the big DVD box set.
I do.
I have the individuals. I don't have the box set like you do. So is that something you would rebuy?
I don't know. There are definitely movies that I have rebought on Blu-ray. When I know that work has gone into it to clean things up,
and that's going to be this. They're putting tremendous effort into it.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know, for a cartoon series, I'm not necessarily sure that I'm going to go out and rebuy a whole series because it's on Blu-ray. I'm pretty sparse about rebuying things, So I don't know that I would pick it up on Blu-ray. So maybe if it was on sale, we'll have to see.
All right, Jerry. I think we both agree that this is better than Batman and Robin.
But this is way better than Batman and Robin.
But it's probably, at least in my opinion, it's not up to the normal standards set by Batman the Animated Series, which is very high. That doesn't make this movie terrible. but there's many episodes of that show, including the new adventures like the last season, that are better than this movie.
Oh, there's definitely episodes and storylines that are better, and there's episodes and storylines that aren't. I thought this was a pretty exciting. Now I'll tell you, here's a good mark of how captivating this was. So I told my little one that, she has seen most of Batman the Animated Series. I think she has watched most of it. I told her she could stay up and watch it with me. I said we can watch this whole movie, which didn't is only an hour. So she probably thought she was getting more than she really got.
Yeah.
We watched it and she was enthralled.
Wow.
Now I will say I watched this movie and I probably had a question every minute, like, what happened to his wife? When are they going to show his wife again? Why isn't Batgirl wearing her costume? Like, there was lots of questions. Some of the questions were great. Some of the questions I'm like, I think I've answered this about 7 times already.
So it's kind of like watching a movie with me when I don't like it.
She sat through the whole movie and loved it. And so I asked my daughter what her 2 favorite parts of this movie were. So her 2 favorite parts. Are you ready?
Can I guess one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna guess the polar bears.
No, not the polar bears.
All right, go ahead. Tell me then.
Her first favorite part of the movie was all the scenes where Batman runs through fire but doesn't catch on fire.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie takes place on like an abandoned oil rig, and it's starting to catch on fire.
Which that thing should be.
Pretty cool scene, but again, I mean, it's climactic. I mean, it probably takes a 10-minute. It's probably a 10-minute scene. It's not that long. But she's asking, why is that Batman catching on fire? And I'm telling her, well, his cape is, flame resistant. Probably has a flame retardant on it to keep it from, igniting. And so we're having this conversation, and that apparently just was a big deal to her that Batman didn't catch on fire. The second thing that she liked about this movie, her next favorite thing, is she liked that Mr. Freeze started to become nice at the end of the movie, which kind of goes back into one of the things. When Batman and Robin get there and are able to start assisting Barbara Gordon, Mr. Freeze, is kind of unhinged a couple times, but something happens and his leg gets broken. And he is concerned about getting his wife and, out of the oil rig. And so he starts kind of doing some stuff to help Batman and Barbara get down there and safely get, oh gosh, what did I say the boy's name was? Kunak?
Yeah, Kunak.
To rescue Kunak and to rescue Nora Freeze. So she really liked that. She really liked at the end that, you think Mr. Freeze is dead at the end, but then there's kind of an epilogue that shows that the Wayne Corporation or Goth Corp maybe assisted Nora Freeze and helped her to get this experimental surgery, that she's alive, she's doing well, and this newsreel is kind of saying that that Victor Freeze is dead or missing, and you see him watching like at this Arctic research post. He's looking in the window watching this newsreel with a tear on his eye that freezes. And my daughter really liked that. She really liked that, he was kind of showing these, things off that maybe he was becoming, nice at the end or starting to show some concern for more people.
I'm glad they didn't cut to like a frozen food factory.
I am so glad too.
Yeah.
The Batman the Animated Series just is such a magical show at times. They treat the characters with such respect.
Yeah,
they really do. And I mean, they have episodes that are just fun, that they don't necessarily have like these, high crazy stakes plots, but they always treat their characters with respect, and they always try to do something unique or different with characters. When they're doing something, they're always moving their characters forward, and it just has such a cool environment. I mean, you're watching it and Now, obviously, there's some things that you look back on that Batman is talking on a phone or a communication device that it is massive. You know, I mean, it's like a big Zach Morris style cell phone. Yeah. You know, but again, I mean that was high tech back at the time. But it also has a very old school feel to it. I mean, you'll look at police cars, you know, and they look like they'd be from like the 20s or 30s or something. It's a show that just, I think because it doesn't feel like it is tied to any time period, it feels very timeless.
It is a very cool movie, no pun intended, right?
Yeah.
Jerry?
There's futuristic things in there, and then there's things that feel very old-fashioned, and they're sort of blended together that it's not set in any time and place. It just takes place in Gotham, in a comic book universe, and that really adds something very cool to the film, very special.
All right, Jerry, this was your first time seeing this movie. What would you rate it?
I'd probably give it a good and a half. I really enjoyed it.
I'm going to go a notch below you. I'm going to say a solid good.
Okay.
So we're fairly close there.
Fairly close there.
Before we wrap up this edition of the Confirmed Epic Podcast, episode 92, is there anything else you want to say about Batman and Mr. Freeze SubZero?
I do.
Okay.
So there was actually supposed to be a third film that would have tied into the animated Batman animated series universe. It's going to be called Batman Arkham. They didn't do it. They were moving on towards New Adventures and Return of the Joker. And from what I've heard, they actually turned a lot of that years later into the Batman Arkham series of video games.
Oh, wow. So it was going to be kind of like the plot of the first game in a way?
Right, because I love the Arkhamverse games. I love the earlier ones more than Arkham Knight, but I still overall love that series. And I mean, again, it does some interesting, unique things with characters, but it also, you can see the DNA of Batman the Animated Series in those games. All right. I mean, obviously they went with Kevin Conroy and, Mark Hamill as well, so.
Our Arkham Knight, as I like to call, Journey of the Batmobile. All right, you go good and a half, I go good. I think we both like this movie. I don't think we were like blown away, but for a direct-to-home video movie from the 90s, it was very enjoyable. So this is a reminder, you can find the Confirmed Epic Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, SoundCloud, YouTube, the Epic Review. You can find it at actionfigurebarbecue.com. You can find it at Geeks Worldwide, dgww.com. Jerry, if a baby doesn't come into this world via my wife within the next week, I have on our schedule to look back at Iron Man 2. As we gear
Man 2, all right, I love it.
As we gear up toward Infinity War, and we both love that movie so much that it may not be a fair review. It may just be us gloating about it. But
I thought you didn't like Iron Man 2.
I don't like Iron Man 3.
Okay, I don't like Iron Man 3 either. So
there's part of Iron Man 3 that I love, and there's part that I hate. And Iron Man 2 there's the first hour I adore. The last hour I don't hate as much as everybody else, but that's for next week if Harper Bell doesn't come into this world between now and then. But rest assured, we have 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 podcasts in the bank ready to distribute for your entertainment pleasure.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And Jerry, thank you so much for joining me tonight. So we'll look forward to looking at Iron Man 2 again. That'll be this was episode 91, I believe?
I think so.
I think maybe I misspoke and said it was 92 earlier in the podcast, but this is episode 91, and Iron Man 2, which is good, will be episode 92. Jerry, where can people find more of you on the internet this week?
Keep checking me out at actionfigurebarbecue.com. That's BARBECUE.com. This Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. April 13th, but it is going to be the Force Friday for the new Solo merchandise.
Really?
It doesn't seem to be as big of a thing as any of the previous Disney films, but that is the official street date for that stuff, although it has been very heavily leaking out because I don't think places realize. But I will certainly be reviewing a bunch of Solo stuff as soon as I get that. But I did a little poll last month and had about 6 or 7 characters that people wanted to see some more reviews of on Saturdays. You know, last month I did a Han Solo review every Saturday. For April, the winner was Deadpool. So the other day I showed off my childhood Deadpool action figure from Toy Biz's X-Force line. And I'll be doing more Deadpool reviews every Saturday in April.
So go to actionfigurebarbecue.com, check out his reviews, hot and fresh, weekly at least, I would say. Mostly daily, though.
Yeah, I've been a little off this week, but I've been busy. Had some folks in town and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. We got to hang out with the main sponsor of this podcast, Bob Reed, Jerry's dad.
We did. You
can get your Thank You Bob Reed shirt at tpublic.com/user/TheRealBradBell. Find me at Twitter at TheRealBradBell, Instagram, Confirmed Epic Podcast. You can find this podcast always on this official home at The Epic Review. That's epicreview.com. And from the frozen Hollywood foothills of North Carolina, once again, we are out.
That's all I have to say about that.
This has been a production of the GWW Radio Network. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, check out Geeks Worldwide at thegww.com for all the latest news, reviews, and opinions on video games, comics, movies, TV, cosplay, and more. Geeks, assemble!